All right, everyone, welcome to this webinar. I hate the term webinar, but that's what it is. So
Lean into it, David. It's our life now. We got out of consumer. This is the price we pay.
This panel, this live conversation with two experts in subscription apps and me, your lowly host. While we wait for folks to stream in, I did want to do introductions. So Phil, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your consulting? I know you've got a live course coming up. So tell us a bit about you, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. My name's Phil Carter. I've really enjoyed being part of the RevenueCat community for a while now. A huge fan of the podcast. So thank you guys for creating such a tight-knit community in this ecosystem. My background, I've been in tech for the last 10 years. I started my career in management consulting in the Bay Area, but very quickly realized I did not want to be a partner at a consulting firm long-term. So I got the hell out of there and started my career in tech. And I found that I really gravitate towards businesses that make individual people's lives better, which is part of the reason that I've gravitated more towards consumer business models versus B2B. I spent 4 years at Quizlet leading the user growth and subscriptions teams and fell in love with subscription business models. And so last summer, after 7 years as a product and growth leader at various tech companies, I went off on my own, started my own growth advising and consulting business called Elemental Growth. And so now I'm spending all of my time professionally helping seed to Series C consumer subscription businesses help figure out their growth strategy and maximize their potential.
Awesome. And then tell us a bit about the Reforge course you have coming up.
Yeah, sure. So this last January, I launched a Reforge course. For those of you who don't know Reforge, it's an online education platform for product growth and marketing leaders. And so I launched Reforge's first course on consumer subscription growth specifically. And so I have guests like Ravi Mehta, former chief product officer at Tinder, or Gina Gotthilf, who led growth and marketing at Duolingo for 6 years, come and talk about their war stories in the trenches, building consumer subscription businesses from the ground up. And then I also have a bunch of asynchronous content where I talk about the subscription value loop, which is this framework that I've developed that basically talks about the importance of creating this compounding loop through value creation, value delivery, and value capture in order to scale consumer subscription businesses, which is not easy. It's easy to launch these businesses. It's harder to scale them.
Yeah. I do take exception to you saying that you went to consumer to help make individual lives better. I think Jacob and I here at RevenueCat are helping make individual developers' lives better.
Oh,
You've just been at the wrong B2B businesses. And so I'm David. I am a growth advocate at RevenueCat, host of the Sub Club podcast. Run the community and do a bunch of other stuff here. I'm actually speaking next week at MAU. If any of you are going, look for my talk. If you're not going, it's actually a really great conference for mobile growth. It's in Vegas, cheap flights, cheap hotels, easy conference to attend. Jacob, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and RevenueCat before we get going?
Hi, I'm Jacob, CEO and co-founder of RevenueCat. We help developers make more money so that they can help people have better lives. That's
there you go. There you go.
But
if you're a developer, we make your life better.
Yeah, I mean, if you I guess if you don't know RevenueCat yet, here's our logo, big sign. It's all over this stuff. I assume most people on the webinar probably have heard of us one way or another. But yeah, I mean, to expand a little bit, I think we're the platform that as best we can, as Phil mentioned, like it's easy to start a subscription business. We help with that too. But even harder to scale, and we're building as many, software tools, education that we can to make that process easier for our customers. So anyway, yeah, that's me. And I don't know, I guess prior experience, I was in, consumer subscriptions industry in the App Store basically my whole life before I started a B2B company so I could do webinars. That's what brings me here today. So.
That really is a dream, isn't it, Jacob? Spending your time doing webinars all day.
It's like his grass is always greener. So I just was like, how could I do some live podcasting? But yeah, here we are. So
awesome. All right. So I think most people who are going to join have joined now. So I did want to mention a few things. We will have a Q&A at the end. If you're joining us on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter, we're experimenting with live streaming on all the platforms today. So if you're joining us on one of those platforms, this is an experiment, and we won't be monitoring for questions on those platforms. So find the link to the main kind of webinar if you want to ask questions. We will have questions at the end. If you want to ask questions now, there is a questions tab. And if you see a good question, vote it up. I'll probably ask the questions in the order of how many votes they have. So pop your questions in, and we'll hold them till the end, though. We won't interrupt kind of the first part of the session for that. And one thing to note, while Jacob and I were both very involved in creating this State of Subscription Apps report, we were not the ones actually pulling the data. So we won't be able to answer questions specifically like, how exactly was this data pulled? What were the SQL queries? What does this mean exactly? Today we'll focus more on broader questions about what it means for your business, what it means for subscription apps more broadly, and things like that. And those are, again, something Phil will be especially good at answering as well. We will share the recording of this on YouTube. Everybody who registered through the main kind of webinar will get it emailed. So you should be expecting that soon. All right, without further ado, let's talk subscription app numbers. I did want to kick it off talking about why benchmarks matter, how to use them, and how not to use them. I think this too often gets overlooked. We touched on it a bit in the podcast that we did about the State of Subscription Apps report, but I did want to kick it off with this just for context. So I'll pass it to Phil first, and let's talk through why benchmarks matter. Like, why should you even care that this State of Subscription Apps report was released? And then we'll talk through like how to actually use them and then how to not use them.
Sure. Yeah, well, I guess to kick things off, I find that product benchmarks are oddly polarizing in our industry. You would think something as seemingly boring and mundane as benchmarks wouldn't be so polarizing, but I hear a lot of people on either end of the spectrum. You've got the people who say, well, benchmarks are worthless. Like, every company is unique, so why does it matter what the averages look like? Because, my company is not the average, and so it doesn't matter. And then I hear people on the other end of the spectrum who are literally like setting, this is extreme, but they're setting their quarterly OKRs strictly based on just like a copy paste of like, okay, the benchmark for trial start is X and trial conversion is Y and download to subscriber conversion is Z. And so those are our OKRs for the quarter or for the year, and we're just going to go hit those targets. And I think the quote right answer lies somewhere in between. When you all had me on your podcast at the end of last year, I talked about how there's this great quote from a British statistician where he says, all models are wrong, but some are useful. I think it's similar to benchmarks. It's part science, part art, and it can be really valuable to understand where you stand relative to the average, whether that's in a category or in a specific country. But then context really matters. And so you have to apply your own judgment to understand why you're seeing a gap and how much of that gap you can actually close. So at the highest level, that's how I like to think about it. And that's how I advise my clients. Make sure you understand where you stand relative to benchmarks, but then apply your own judgment.
Yeah. Jacob, your thoughts?
I mean, it sucks to reduce your entire life's work to numbers, but if you don't do that, like, it's way too easy to lie to yourself and be like, we're doing great because I have this special little project that I care so much about and I've poured so much of my life into. And if you don't use some sort of like understanding of where you stand, it leaves too much space for diluting your belief, and just believing you're maybe doing better than you are. And in the reality, I think it's because Phil hit on it. It's like it's very gray, and like you need to like take all of these numbers within context. But until you like actually lay it out and kind of benchmark and look at what you're doing versus what your peers are doing, or like similar sets, comps, comparables, I don't know how you would get started otherwise. Like, I think a lot of product people are very intuitive, and I think that's actually should be 51% of what you're doing is like talking to users and like bringing your artistic, whatever talents you brought to get you there, is important. And that should probably be what you lean on. But understand that certain activities are going to move these metrics or not. And at the end of the day, there's a certain physics to these businesses, and they're defined more or less by these metrics, right? And so if you don't at least understand them, you're going to be making a lot of decisions and then not understanding why you're not getting the results you would like. At least with the metrics, you can connect the two and start to like understand and start to prioritize, do I spend resources on my like pet little feature, even though I know it's not going to move the metrics a ton? That's okay. But like, you need to start with metrics to like, and benchmarks to understand when you can make those trade-offs, right? As Phil was saying, don't just like take a metric, a benchmark, and be like, put it on your board for OKRs and yeah, right? Like you need to like still be a little bit more tailored to your own situation. So love benchmarks, big fan. It's really nice when you're a SaaS company. There's a lot of them out there because there's a lot of public SaaS companies, and they publish pretty much most of the metrics that matter. It's less true for B2C because like often they're mixed models and things like this. It's especially B2C subscriptions. There's just not that many public companies that, there's Netflix and some of these, but like those honestly aren't super comparable across, sort of the different kinds of apps that we serve today. And so I think that's why, not to talk about how good our state of subscriptions report is, but I think that is one of the advantages, is like kind of give you some of that visibility and at a more granular level than you even would get from, like public market data on other companies. So, yeah.
I think it was you, Jacob, who talked about, ultimately you can and should reduce your company and operating into an equation. It's like inputs and outputs, and there's all these different aspects that can be formed into a mathematical equation for how to move this number with that number. Yeah. And the benchmarks kind of give you an overview of the things that are going to contribute to that model that you build of your business. Yeah. And help you understand when we've talked about this before, but if you use a hard paywall, well, you should know and intuit that your trial start rates are going to go up, but that also probably means your trial conversion rate is going to go down. It's like you can manipulate any one of these variables individually, but really it's part of a broader equation that moves the needle. If you bring in a lot of low intent traffic, your retention is probably going to be low, even if you can maybe, juice their conversion rate. So it's like there's so many different parts of the equation. And I do think that the State of Subscriptions report gives you kind of that overview of all the different parts of the equation that then you can start building your own model around.
And we don't explicitly publish an equation, but there's a bit of an implicit equation because every business is a little bit different, as Phil probably knows, like building, slight modifications here and there, but we kind of base the metrics we share. And the RevenueCat product generally is based on what I think are the base orthogonal-ish metrics that you should know and you should think about. But of course, like everybody's precious little flower is different. So like apply it as appropriate. But I think it's a really good starting point for most of our customers and users.
A couple other quick points. Yeah, David, if you don't mind, I wanted to jump in just on a couple other things. So Jacob, you mentioned how I will say the State of Subscriptions app report is the most comprehensive I've seen for consumer subscription out there. And in particular, I think what you guys do an incredible job of is looking at much smaller companies and mid-sized companies. And actually, I think this is my unsolicited advice, but I love how you're now breaking it out by category and country. I think one other thing you could do in a future report is break it out by company stage, because one of the things I find is, one of the things I find, so we'll talk about this in a moment, the 1.7% download to subscriber conversion rate is the average, right? But for the largest, most at scale companies, you typically see like 4% is pretty good. Yeah. Like there's a bunch of public data you can find, Strava, All Trails, they're like around that number. The very best, like Duolingo, are more like 8 to 10%. But it depends on stage. And actually, if you're earlier, sometimes you can get as high as 15 or 20% because you're at small scale and you're going after early adopters. And so stage really matters. And I think that's one thing that I've been able to find in your report that I haven't found anywhere else, because mostly you just have these big public companies or companies that are about to go public. And then the other thing I was going to say on business equation, and I dropped a link in the chat to a Lenny's newsletter on how to think about your business as an equation, which I highly recommend. But one of the things that's really cool about benchmarks is you want to find a bottleneck. Like, where in your business equation is the biggest bottleneck at any given time? And it's going to move, because If you're really good at acquiring users but not converting them into subscribers, well, then your bottleneck is subscriber conversion. So you put a bunch of work into that. But then as you improve subscriber conversion, now you're not getting enough users at the top of the funnel, so that the shifts to trial starts or to cost per install. That's right. And so you always want to be thinking about it that way. Where is the bottleneck in the equation? And that's where we should be focusing our efforts. But benchmarks are the key to understanding where the bottleneck is.
Yeah. There's also just a painful non-independence of all these things, right? Which you kind of highlighted, right? It's like, it's you plug one hole, another hole opens, and like and that is, it's a thing you learn through experimentation. Sometimes there are changes which yield an overall lift in output. Sometimes there are changes that just move around sort of like, where people are churning or where people are falling off. And there will be some things you do that happens, and there'll be other things where you just were leaving things on the table. The hard thing is you don't really know. It's hard to know exactly where that's going to be until you do it. And another thing, Phil, based on what you said, like, 4% for some public, 8% for Duolingo, 15% for some really early stage. We publish averages, but and we try to publish like quartiles and stuff like this, but like these distributions are pretty wide. Like apps can vary a lot. And that really matters. And I think that goes back to why you should use these metrics informationally, but not like literally necessarily, right? Like if you're at 2%, that might be where you should be. It might be half of where you should be. And it's really hard to know until you experiment and really apply it to your situation. But yeah, and I think that's generally just the difficulty in metrics and benchmarks generally is, one, you have to produce some summary statistic. We often use medians or averages. But that often doesn't like fully capture really the dimensions that these numbers are kind of built on and change with. But yeah, I like that idea. That gives us another 30 pages for next year's report. So I appreciate it.
Anytime.
All right. I think we've done a pretty good job of talking through why they matter and how to use them. You build an equation for your business. How not to use them. Don't set any individual metric as your KPI. Use them as reference points to find those sticking points, not to try and emulate, be top quartile in every single one individually. But anything else, Phil or Jacob, as we wrap up this discussion on how to use or not to use the benchmarks?
I think the last thing I'll say, which is more just a trap to avoid, is make sure that, number one, you're ideally finding benchmarks that map to your country and your category. And if you can find it, your company stage. And number two, make sure that you are not treating any one benchmark as the end all be all, because as Jacob said, it's a system, right? Like Lenny talks about growth as like a car, right? It's a system. And so as one metric goes up, other metrics might come down, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a byproduct of the first metric going up. So for example, if you're really, I have a client I've been working with recently, they're exceptionally good at converting new users into trials. Their subscriber conversion from those trials is a little bit lower than average, not much, but it's a little bit lower. But those two things are correlated because they're so good at getting low and medium intent users into the trial in the first place that of course their subscriber conversion is going to be a little bit lower. And so it's just really important to apply that context.
Awesome. Let's dive into the report more specifically then. So these are the top 5 takeaways that we shared in the report. And so I did want to, since they were the top 5 takeaways, I wanted to pause here for a minute and talk about some of these. We already discussed the 1.7% of downloads turned into paying subscribers in the first 30 days. And the fact that it was slightly up from the last report. I think, to me, this is always just the highlight of the entire subscription app industry, is to just understand this relatively simple fact that for most businesses, and even the best in the world doing high single digits, not even double digits, is that it is such a numbers game, is that you got to get a lot of people into the funnel to convert some small, generally often low single digit number of those people who come in into paying subscribers. Any thoughts on that, Jacob and Phil?
It's always been the game. I think making money on the internet, it's a numbers game, right? Which maybe I think the only I guess you don't know this until you know it, right? But I think the biggest, I guess, like insight or like sort of, I don't know, thinking that this makes me do is just like, how are you thinking about what to do with those other 98%, right? Or like, how are you balancing your experience based on this fact, right? It's a reality. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 6, whatever. But like, regardless, a vast majority of users are, I'm not going to say freeloaders, but one might say freeloaders, right? Like folks that are not going to pay you. And it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing. We have a lot of RevenueCat users who don't pay us. It's part of the model, right? You know, and they may pay you someday, probably not a lot of them, to be honest, like probably won't. Now, like, I think that it just informs where and when and how, you know, you trade off on what's behind a paywall and whatnot. And like, I had my boss at Elevate kind of reset my thinking on this one time while we were debating. You know, I was trying to be so pro user and like, we didn't want to like put something behind a paywall and like make sure our free experience is really good. I think it was like not a hard paywall, but like forcing a paywall in the onboarding experience. Like this was in like 2013, maybe. We didn't really understand like what was going to be sort of normal and acceptable. And I still remember something he said to me. So I was like, I don't want to put this in the onboarding. It's going to drop off. It's tacky. It's like, whatever, like we'll put it behind a tap. And then he's like, listen, this app is free. 98% of people aren't going to pay for it. They can look at a paywall, right? Like think of all the effort we've put into this thing. All we're asking is to consider our one-time offer, right? Like, and that really changed my thinking. It's like, yeah, it's like, and I think that's the challenge of freemium in general. It's always like, you want to give stuff away for free to get people in, but you really got to know, you know, like you really got to know where to draw the line. And I think the other, before I hand to Phil, the other insight here is just like 1.7 is really small. And the nice thing is, and I don't know why this is the case, it feels like that's an easier number to move. It shouldn't be, but like, it feels like conversion, like getting that conversion from 1.7 to 1 point or like 2.2 isn't a massive move in the distribution, but like that's could be like 50% improvement on your output metric. So like conversion can be highly, if it's under optimized. If it's not under optimized, you probably won't be able to do anything. But if you're under optimized on conversion, this can be a really, and that usually the under optimized, I don't know if Phil, you agree with this, but like usually the under optimization comes from like poor placement. Like, so you're just not getting it in front of people enough. So you're going to have bad conversion. And if there's gains to be done there, just showing people the paywall more can often move it in big ways. But anyway, yeah, that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, I think placement is a big part of it. And I can't remember if I've shared this anecdote with you two before, but I spent a few years in venture capital about a decade ago. And this was right around the time that more and more VC firms were starting to use quantitative data to try to, you know, find needles in the haystacks more easily. And one of the things I still remember this day was I was aggregating a whole bunch of App Store data across Google Play Store and Apple's App Store. And what I found was it wasn't a super strong correlation, but one of the indicators, particularly in the social networking category, that an app was on the verge of breakout was extremely high numbers of reviews and ratings, but actually like a middling rating. So like a 3 or a 3.5 star. And so I started to dig into that. And what I realized was people won't bother to complain or leave a low rating unless they really care about your product.
Oh, sure.
If they don't care, they just won't bother to leave any rating at all. And so I think it's similar with paywalls. I do think and I work with a lot of earlier stage companies that they're doing what they should be doing, right? Founders, it's like it's your baby. And so the last thing you want to do is upset your users. And so there's this hesitancy to show a paywall at all. Or if you show it, you don't show it until the second session, right? But we're going to talk in a little bit about how many subscribers convert in their first session. And so if you're, number one, if you're not even giving people an opportunity to know that you have a premium product in the first place, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. And number two, a few people will complain. They always do. At Quizlet, we ran into this all the time. Students complained about anything not being free, but they complained because the product was valuable and they cared about it and they wanted access to it. And so, and the only way you're going to be able to continue to deliver value as a business is if you make enough money to stay in business. And some of that comes to value capture and making sure you're monetizing your product.
Yeah. No, crap. I lost my thought. David, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is turning into a bit of a therapy session for me personally. I recently launched an update to my weather app, and pretty much all the bad reviews are about the price. And I have, over the last month, forced myself to recontextualize. Like, when anybody leaves a bad review, or like Phil, you were saying, a middling review, it demonstrates that they care. And so the fact that people are complaining about oh my gosh, $40 a year for a weather app, it has been really helpful to think about it in that way. It's like, people think it's valuable enough that they want it, and they care enough about that value to go complain about the price.
Yeah.
And pretty much all of the bad reviews are about the price. And I'm starting to wear that as a bit of a badge of honor, that that people care enough.
The luxury is
to
a Veblen good, David.
Price.
Yeah, like, who needs a premium weather app is like a conspicuous consumption thing, right? So you should lean into it.
But that's a great framing.
The nice thing about having a subscription app that's software, where your marginal cost to serve a user is virtually zero, is if people are complaining about the price, there are plenty of savvy ways to offer discounts to align your pricing curve to willingness to pay, and so that's a good problem to have. You can solve that problem.
Yep, totally. Well, in the interest of time, we're not going to go through each of these. I think that is the most interesting of the 5 takeaways, and then we'll actually cover some of these takeaways in the next few slides that we're going to discuss. But yeah, I would assume everybody who's on this webinar has already downloaded the report. If you haven't, revenuecat.com/report. And you can kind of dig into each of these individually. But we're going to move on to the first slide we wanted to cover in depth. And this is one Jacob picked, so I will let him take it away.
Yeah, so David asked us to go through the deck and kind of pick out a slide that we thought was worth talking to. And this one kind of jumped out at me right away because, as Phil kind of alluded, there's a bunch of these, like, kind of obvious in hindsight, but maybe slightly unintuitive things about these businesses. And this one, I think, was one I stumbled through the dark to discover, and then realized how powerful it is and important it is for you to, like, really optimize around. Because coming from, well, speaking in comparison, but basically the takeaway is that most commerce, for a number of reasons, is going to happen like in a user's download day, or like very, very close to that. And we say like 86% in utilities, 85% regardless, like, it's high. So what that means is you shouldn't like resist this. You should lean into this and think about, I think it highlights how important, like, a first impression is. We know about it in people, but it applies to software and products, I think, almost more. Right. That first, there are some products which, like, maybe defy this, like maybe Craigslist, or maybe like there's Anki flashcards. There's a couple of these, like, really pro tools that are Vim for the coders out there. There's certain products out there which are really bad in their first impression, but, like, wear on you over time. I don't think that's the marketplace we're dealing with in consumer subscriptions. You have to, a user's got a problem, unless they came from an ad or something. So you just got a problem. They Google it, they App Store search it, and they find your app. They go, okay, I'm going to download this. Like, they're trying to do 2 things. Like, what they're just trying to understand, is my life going to be the life I want to have after? And is this app going to do it for me? And if the answer is yes, if you convince them, that's going to be the highest moment of intent. If you can convince them, then that's like your most likely chance to convert them, right? Because after that, maybe they get through that and then they see, well, the free plan is actually pretty good. And, like, maybe in another world they would have committed and subscribed, but, like, maybe you didn't really present it well enough. And now it's like, well, I'm kind of using the free tier. But then, like, 2 things happen. Like, their intent maybe spike comes down a little bit. And then they're maybe just, like, in general less likely to engage, period. Which, like, maybe they would churn, maybe not. But I think it's, to Phil's point, you have to think about the benefit to the business. It's like, hey, like, if this is the highest moment of intent, like, let's capitalize on that to try and get the user paying so that we can build that relationship, right? And then, of course, you got to follow that up with value. And that's why, when retention and things come into play. But this ties in very much to that anecdote I was talking about at the beginning about making sure you're showing a paywall. Like, when your user downloads their app, don't waste any time not telling them that it's a premium product. Like, they should know, probably even from the App Store page, like, you can see it's got in-app purchases, right? But, like, you want to be right from at least my philosophy, you want to be right from the get-go educating the user on, like, what they get with Pro, or, like, and it doesn't even have to be so explicit, right? And this is where, I mean, also first time user experiences, like if you haven't invested in your first time user experience, and like, I don't know, Phil, you can probably say like you probably spend half your time on these apps at scale working on first time user experience, right? It goes back to that 98% don't convert anyway. It's like you're constantly optimizing this funnel. And so that's kind of my takeaway here. It's like, if you're gonna, well, I mean, look at your benchmarks. Maybe you're doing fine, but there's a ton of surface area in that first, like, it's like 3 minutes of usage, right? Think about what you're telling your user. Think about like the most polished part of your app should probably be that part. And really spend time there thinking about what you're trying to achieve. But and it's not just educating users on the functionality of the app or just getting their login, right? It's a start of a relationship. And so, yeah, I think that like, if you haven't invested here, this is probably a place to go. Like, okay, we're going to redo our, what did you guys call it at Quizlet? We always called it FATUI, first time user experience. Did you have a name for it?
I've heard FATUI. I've heard NUX, new user experience.
I've heard that with the F as well, FUX quite often.
Yeah, I've heard that one too.
And that's kind of appropriate. But whatever you call it,
it will FUX you if you don't.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Your point.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is usually the first thing I work on with any new client, and it's kind of killing two birds with one stone, because it's a great way for me to get to know their product and their customer very quickly, but it's also just such a high leverage moment in the user journey, right? If you don't convert a user into, at the very least, believing it's worth coming back for a second session on their first, then nothing else matters because they're not coming back. So there's so much leverage with new user onboarding. There's all sorts of anecdotal and statistical evidence that improving the onboarding experience, improving the first session experience, not only improves activation rate, sign-up rates, trial start rate, but it also improves long-term retention rate, subscriber conversion rate, subscriber retention rate. And so it's one of the few things that kind of affects all of your metrics if you do a really, really good job of it. So yeah, I can't emphasize the importance of this enough. It's true that some companies do a much better job of this than others, but it's rare to have, I have yet to find the company that has like optimized their onboarding to the point where they don't need to be working on it anymore, which is why some of the largest, most sophisticated companies, Duolingo, Strava, AllTrails, they spend a lot of time every year revisiting their onboarding flows and just making sure they're optimal, adopting new best practices. And one specific example that I'll give is, as recently as 12 months ago, I think the best practice in the industry was considered to be, and I preach this in my course, it's like, get the user to the aha moment as fast as possible, which usually means as few screens as possible. But one of the evolving trends I'm seeing is actually onboarding flows that are slightly longer, that include a number of highly targeted quiz questions and then personalized interstitial screens that sort of say, well, let's take the example of ladder, which you guys have had on your podcast. Oh, you've tried workouts in the past. Well, we're going to assume that means they haven't worked for you, or you wouldn't be here looking into ladder. And here's how ladder is going to make your experience better and succeed where other workout apps have failed. And so there's this trade-off that's being made where they're probably burning off more low intent users on the margins. They're like, I don't want to go through all these screens. But for the middle and high intent users, which are the only ones that are going to convert into subscribers and make you any money anyways, they're actually building intent, or they're boosting what's called positive psych over the course of this onboarding experience, which leads to higher trial start rates and higher subscriber conversion rates. And so it's one of these things where the game is always evolving, and the best companies are staying abreast of the latest trends, the latest best practices to keep an edge.
Yeah, we did exactly this at Elevate. It was one of our, and this was something, again, like these were all lessons hard learned for me, because I don't know, I thought I was being very first principles, but it turns out if you're fully first principles in this industry, sometimes you get it wrong. But yeah, that exact thing, we added a bunch of friction. This would have been like 2014 through our personalized onboarding game. And I was not on board, because I was like, I'd always learned, I come from gaming, where it's different. Like, you're not necessarily trying to get people to buy right away. You're trying to habitualize usage, and then you monetize through, basically like whale users and other mechanisms. So it's a whole different equation. And so in this, it felt very odd to me to like try and actually like slow down that experience. And we measured the crap out of it as we rolled it out. So, and this goes back to your point earlier about, all these metrics being interrelated, because, you add this friction, you're going to probably increase your eventual, you might decrease your overall conversion rate might go down or might stay the same, but like your retention rates might be way higher, right? Like there's going to be these like sort of, and this actually is kind of what makes it sometimes hard to test these things. But the nice thing also in terms of like onboarding as a focus area is that you just have so many at bats. Just think, because every day your app's getting downloaded thousands of times, right? And so you can really measure down to the time it takes from screen to screen and where exactly each piece of drop off is. You can run a lot of you can run a lot of A/B testing there because you'll get significance very quickly.
Yep.
So there's a lot of structural reasons why working in there is good. And then, I think also to your point, Phil, about it teaching you about the company, it's like kind of everything's wrapped up in that onboarding, right? Like you can really hone your pitch. I think about it, we do sales now. I don't do onboarding, I do sales. And, making sure that you can succinctly explain what you do and get the person on the other side excited and aligned to knowing what you do is valuable to them as quickly as possible. It's a pitch, right? So
Yep.
You got to think about it that way. And the cool thing with software is that, you can make it interactive, right? You can take surveys and then generate content, right? That's the latter example is perfect because like you're not just like telling them you're going to bring value. You're actually bringing them value in that. Like if you can bring them like a little free piece of value, it's like, well, geez, they gave me, I got a free toaster. Like what can imagine if I'm a full customer of theirs or whatever, right? Like these are kind of tried and true tricks of of getting folks into your your umbrella. So, but yeah, work on your onboarding. That's my one piece of advice for 2024 onboarding.
Well, and just to briefly add to that, I like to call it show, don't tell. Like make sure, ideally, you're not just telling people why your product is valuable. You're showing them in the first 30 seconds, in the first 3 minutes. And it doesn't have to be much, but just like the minimum viable experience that shows them why they should keep coming back.
Yeah, and there's some interesting UX things there because I think you can probably overstuff your paywall, your like single paywall with this information. And I don't know. You probably have to ask Jake more from Superwall if he has any insights on how well that works or not. But like the thing with the onboarding is the whole thing is a paywall, right? Like don't think of like, oh, we're gonna have the onboarding and then at the end we're gonna show them the upsell and whatever, and then you'll have your standard thing. You probably want a very different experience there, and like you probably want to be building up to that. What you would think of verticalizing into one paywall or carousel paywall experience. Like you want to think about spreading that out into something a little bit more interactive and a little bit more, And I mean, the good news is like it's in consumer. There's a lot more art. Like you have to make something pretty and exciting, right? And attractive to a consumer. And the nice thing is that onboarding is a really good palette for that. You can kind of play for days, right? But be measuring. So like if you're, and this is where the benchmarks come in too. Like if your benchmarks on onboarding have already hitting these numbers and whatever, like, I don't know, there may be other areas that you should focus on, but I think absent of knowing, what's good and what's bad, this is probably the best suggestion I could give. So.
Yeah. And one thing I did want to mention in relation to this is that that first 24 hours doesn't actually start with your onboarding. That first 24 hours generally will start with an ad, Apple having featured your app, press mentions, a friend telling them about the app. Like this 24 hours starts with some awareness of your app, however you get them to be aware of your app. And then the next step is then them hitting your app store page, and then they download and open your app. And so thinking about that first 24 hours, you shouldn't just be thinking of onboarding, although, I mean, it is that high leverage moment like we've been discussing, but you should also be, and we don't have stats for this because it's not something we at RevenueCat can track, but you should be thinking those two steps up as well. It's like, what intent are our ads helping to generate, or what source of traffic are we expecting? Like for me, when I recently relaunched my weather app, I knew so much of the traffic was going to be coming from press. The press was going to do a good job of kind of pre-filtering for intent. And I actually didn't spend as much time on my onboarding for this launch because I knew I wasn't going to be running ads. Now it's time for me to start working on that onboarding as I start bringing on other sources of traffic. So think about your onboarding not just as once they get into the app, but think about it from starting to create that intent with your ads, with your referrals, with press, with whatever you're going to do, and then nurture that intent through the App Store page and the screenshots and the icon and the subtitle and everything else. And then your onboarding is kind of a continuation of building up that intent and a continuation of that experience from when they first become aware of your app. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide. But before we do, I was looking through the questions, and most of these questions are very specific and probably not things we're going to be able to answer today. So if you have a more generalized question, pop it into questions because we will get to questions here pretty soon. And upvote any ones that are more generalized so I can get to those. So the next slide we wanted to cover is a slide Phil picked out. So Phil, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I will say, Jacob, you actually picked out the one that was my second choice that I helped pick. So I'm glad you picked that one because it gave us a chance to talk about onboarding. But to me, and this is true of really any business, but I think it's especially true in consumer subscription, retention is king. Like if you don't have long-term subscriber retention that is at an acceptable rate, you don't have a business. It's just a matter of time. And so to me, this really stood out that upper quartile apps retain 4.5x more customers after the second renewal. And I'm sure that if you were to look within the top quartile, as you all have done in some of your other analyses and looked at like 90th percentile, 95th percentile, it's just going to go up and up and up because this is what separates the category leaders from everyone else. And the reason for that is it's the foundation you're building your business on, right? Like I have all of these benchmarks for my Reforge course. And so we talk about first month renewal, first year renewal, second period renewal, et cetera. After the second renewal, the retention of a subscriber that gets to that second renewal and renews gets much, much, much better. And so you're able to really rely on those customers being the foundation of your business long term. It's much more efficient to retain those subscribers than it is to try to keep acquiring new subscribers. And so what that means is for mature businesses like Duolingo or Spotify or Strava that have been around a long time and have these really high intent subscribers that are just paying them year after year after year, they're able to be much more efficient, and it gives them kind of this competitive moat around their business. One other thing I wanted to highlight here is I spent most of my career in B2C, but I have worked for a couple B2B businesses, both full-time and clients. And a lot of prosumer subscription and enterprise B2B businesses have this metric that they call NRR, or net revenue retention. And it's this idea that over time, you're going to have some customers churn, but the customers that you retain end up becoming more and more valuable because they purchase more seats or they purchase a tier subscription. And so in the whole, the increase in average account size offsets the churn from low intent subscribers, and the best businesses end up with greater than 100% NRR, net revenue retention. Well, in consumer subscription, it's really hard to do that because there's really just one subscription. Very few companies offer more than that. And so it makes it even more important to get those long-term subscriber retention rates to a point where you really have a viable business. The other implication of this, and then I'll turn it back over, is there are more and more subscription businesses that are experimenting with hybrid monetization models. And you guys talked a little bit about this in your report. I think Tinder and other dating apps have been one of the pioneers here, where they've got consumables like boosts or other features that you can pay for that are complementary to the subscription that make the experience more valuable. The reason that's so important as a business is it gives you an opportunity to monetize your whales at a much, much higher level, which helps offset some of your subscriber churn from lower intent subscribers. And so getting this right is so important. It may actually be the one thing that I would consider more important than onboarding, but a great onboarding experience, we know, leads to higher long-term subscriber retention. So they work together as a system.
Yeah, well, it's which problems do you have in which order, right? So like you're always going to have the onboarding problem first, and assuming you're working in linear time, getting that solved is, I think, the first step to building up a well optimized machine. And then once you have built that longer term subscriber base, then it makes sense. That becomes, you think about Spotify and Netflix and these monster apps that have been around for a decade. Just think about the number of subscribers they have. That's so much momentum. Right. It's like, how do you even, you just can't onboard that many people in a month to move that number that much. Right. versus think how many of those people can churn, right? You've got like more people actively subscribed than are even doing drive-bys. And so they're just the balance changes on what parts of the equation have more weight. And then, back to the equation too, there's always this Taylor series expansion or whatever of like, if you just take a subscription rate and you compound it out forever, like, I think it's 1/1 minus the churn, right? So you have this non-linear inverse relationship with churn rate that multiplies into your LTV or into your like monetization, which just means it's not 5% close. If you go from 15 or, maybe your annual retention rate is 50 to 50%, maybe you can move it to 55. That's not a 5% increase in LTV. It's higher than that, right? It's non-linear. I don't know what it is exactly, but as you get closer and closer to 100%, that actually is a non-linear adjustment. And so there's a bunch of reasons why this really matters. The net retention thing is really interesting because like it's one of the reasons I enjoy doing a B2B business these days is because it's not so much of the treadmill of refilling the funnel. But I've always it's challenging, I think, to design a like good experience where your long-term users can pay more. I think Spotify has done a pretty good job. I have a Spotify. At some point, an app becomes your forever app, which I think is kind of Phil, what you're talking about. Like once an app fills a forever need that you have, and you've kind of settled, like this is my brand. Like I'm just going to use Duolingo forever because I enjoy doing it and whatever. And for Spotify, for music, that's Spotify. I get the UI. I've got playlists in there. Like I will probably until the all-out trade war between the EU and the US starts and they turn off Spotify in the US, I will probably continue to use Spotify. But they've done a decent job, which is like, essentially seats. So like I have me on Spotify and my wife on Spotify. There's like a smattering of young adults who I've given Spotify to for Christmas. And like, I just give them a Spotify subscription as they're like, whatever, I'm your uncle, your brother-in-law, whatever. Here's a $15 a month for the rest of your life, sort of thing. And that's gotten some more revenue retention out of me, but like, it's hard. I don't know. Have you seen specific tactics that folks have been trying to like, because I don't know if you'll ever get north of 100% in B2C, but like if you're trying to decide between, do I go from 50% annual renewal rate to 55, or do I just see if I can like squeeze a little bit of expansion out of my like dedicated users? There might be more leverage in the expansion. So I don't know what the state of the art is there if people are trying anything serious.
Yeah, so I think you're right. You're never going to get over 100%. I shouldn't say never, but it's nearly impossible to get over 100% as a consumer subscription business. But you can certainly improve. And I think the companies that have been most innovative within consumer subscription are dating apps. I mentioned Tinder before, and Ravi's been a live guest speaker for my course a couple times and has talked about all of the innovation Tinder did to add these consumables, which meaningfully improved the ARPU, average revenue per user, of their whales, and that was transformative for their business. Like they're public.
They have something similar to gaming, right? It's like progressive random. Like you're rolling, and then attached like human libido to that. It's like a rocket ship, right? But like, how do you do that for like Duolingo? Like I guess they do actually. They do like they do.
Yeah. Duolingo is one of the other ones,
and like a lot of other things. Yeah. So I don't know.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I think, and there are more and more apps that are starting to experiment with it. And again, it's not the thing you should be doing if you're a solo developer or
day one.
Like, don't worry about this until you're at the point where you've got a mature business. But once you have a mature business, it's really, really powerful because it solves one of the hardest challenges of being a consumer subscription app, where if you only have one subscription price, then you're not able to take advantage of all of the consumer.
You can only go down.
Basically giving it sales.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things dating apps have done really well is having multiple tiers. I mean, Tinder now has 3 different tiers. And so you think about people that they get onto the lowest tier, let's say that's, I don't know with Tinder, but even thinking my weather app, like one of the things I'll probably eventually do is have a $20 tier and a $40 tier. So if I get people on that $20 tier, and then a certain percentage of those I can move up to the $20 tier, I'm doubling the amount of money they're paying. So however many users I can push up that funnel, I'm not going to get to 100% net revenue retention, but doubling the amount they pay by having tiers actually does compensate for a lot of potential churn by getting more out of the users who are sticking around. So I think tiers, while it can be complex and you should wait probably till later stage to start introducing that level of complexity, that's one way to kind of push toward net revenue retention, even if you don't necessarily have ways to do consumables and one-time purchases the way the dating apps do.
Yeah. I just I'm giving Lenny all sorts of free promotion, but he's done a great job with these benchmark posts, and he talks about what is good retention, what is good net revenue retention, and what he says is 55% is good, 80% is great for consumer SaaS
on an annual basis. You mean?
Yeah. It says if you look at like all the B2B SaaS companies, great is above 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody's you're not investable if you have less than 100% NRR in B2B usually. But yeah, I mean, I wonder if folks should actually, like, when you're planning and, for folks that already are in early stages and just knocking out some of these early things, it's, maybe not top of mind, but I do wonder if you're gonna run at consumer subscriptions in 2024, which, like, we still should. I think there's lots of problems to be solved, but if your aspirations are to be the next Duolingo, I mean, I'm sure Duolingo didn't monetize anything for 4 years, like, or something. They didn't do anything. It didn't matter. They just focused on product, which, like, maybe can still work, but also App Store was very different in 2013. Like, it's a little bit more difficult now. But I almost wonder if you should have at least some ideas, right? Like, at least, like, build your product in a way where you can unlock, and the term used, Phil, that's, I think, just the right term used, is consumer surplus, right? Like, there's always going to be some amount of consumer surplus meaning value the customer gets out of that you're not monetizing in some way. And, think about ways that you can elegantly fit that into the product that doesn't feel bolted on, that doesn't, violate sort of the pact you had with your customers to begin with. And, Duolingo, I mean, there's a lot to talk about Duolingo and things they've done right, but, like, their streak maintenance coupled with the like really strange relationship they have with the owl. I don't know if you've seen, like, the stuff they're building with the owl is kind of like your educational sort of I don't know, dominant relationship person where they're like, do your Duolingo, right? It works, right? It's like synergistic, right? You're building this sort of expectation and it feels fun. It's like, you're not forced to do it. Maybe it's not totally healthy, but it's probably still better than just like a full progressive random casino. But yeah, I would be interested to see, or to see what folks can think of. Cause I don't know. It's gotten harder. Like, the whole industry and consumer subscription has gotten harder, especially if you want to be a breakout. Like, I think if you're, and this comes into financing and, like, what your end goals are for your business. Like, I think if you're not, like, trying to get north of 100 million in revenue, like, if that's not really, like, I think you can still build some really good mid-cap, low-cap businesses without having to resort to that kind of stuff. But, like, if your plan and the way your economics are set up and the future you want to build does entail, like, hey, I've got to be able to be public market sized, I think you basically have to, not to be the guy that's like consumer subscriptions has an end to it, but I do think you need to be thinking about ways to expand beyond that LTV equation only containing the subscription component. And we've only talked about, like, actual, like, in-app purchase expansion, but there's other things. There's ads, there's, like, out-of-app purchasing. There's, like, lots of other ways that you can monetize. And yeah, this is probably way down the road though for most of the folks on this pod.
Yeah. Good stuff to think about, though. I do want to jump to the last slide so that we have time for questions. And this was my slide, so I'll speed run it. But I found this super interesting, that the 14 and 60-day realized LTV for App Store search ad generated downloads. So, at RevenueCat, we are able to track, and we do track the downloads that are coming from App Store search ads, because App Store search ads will, and I won't get into all the technical details, but it's actually the only
visible to us.
Yeah, it's the only deterministic ad network left where you do know for certain whether they came from Apple search ads or not, because they pass a little token when somebody's come from Apple search ads. So what's so fascinating to me is that this to me just really demonstrates how much intent is generated through search. That your realized LTV at 60 days is, I think, more than twice the realized LTV of all the other sources combined. So other organic traffic, other ad-based traffic and whatnot. And this is something you need to, again, think about through this entire funnel, is that, when somebody goes to the App Store and searches, learn a language, like, they're demonstrating a level of intent that you just don't get when they see your ad or happen upon your app in other ways. And then that's something you have to really capitalize on, again, nurturing that from when they first become aware of your app all the way through becoming a subscriber. And this shows that intent is king in realizing revenue from those users. And so finding ways to increase that intent in your ads, in your app store, and other ways is what's going to help you realize more revenue. And search ads are a great way to do that. The other really interesting thing here is just how much North America, the rest of the world pales in comparison for monetization to the US. And this is just a reality of the subscription business and economics and consumerism in the US and other things. But it's important to keep in mind. And, Phil's made a great point, and I'll steal your thunder a little bit, Phil, in interest of time, that even though this is true, if you look at EMA, Japan, South Korea, rest of the world, like, there's still a lot of money to be made in these other countries. And so while, a lot of apps will focus on the US early on and focus on iOS specifically, and you see the difference between the App Store and Play Store here as well, to build that truly great business over time, the great apps do find ways to expand into these other markets and find ways to increase that realized LTV in the other markets and on Android, not just iOS. But this does explain why so many apps launch and focus more on the US than they do the rest of the world, especially in those early stages. Any kind of final comments, and then we'll jump to Q&A.
Very small, but it's interesting. Japan's price purchase parity is less than half of the US. So there's actually relative less spend per dollar in the Japanese economy on app stores than in the US, which tells me one, these countries are growing, but two, there is just a cultural gap on how much folks are willing to spend. And I don't know, some of that might be sort of baked in, some of that might be just sort of trend. And so I would be surprised though that these numbers don't go anywhere but up, would be my 2-cent take. So
yeah, my quick take. I know we want to get to Q&A, but my last quick take. So there's 3 comparisons on here, right? There's comparisons across regions. There's comparison between App Store and Play Store. But the last one is day 14 versus day 60. And one thing that stands out to me here is day 60 rLTV is actually not much higher than day 14, which goes back to Jacob's point around a lot of subscribers converting in their first 24 hours. But I think the other important implication of that is just make sure you don't get out over your skis as a business with predicting LTVs that just keep going up and up and up. Because the reality is you're gonna generate a lot of your monetization from cohorts right at the beginning. And that's great from a cash flow standpoint, but it's not so great if you are expecting, if your PLTV, your predicted LTV is much higher than reality, because then what happens is, worst case scenario, you raise a bunch of venture capital funding, you spend it all on Facebook ads, and your realized LTV comes in way below your expectations, and then you're in a world of hurt. So
even worse than venture capital is bank debt, which I've
Sure.
encountered some folks that, or venture debt, you take, because when you can't pay that back, it's real bad.
Sure.
So.
I will use this as an opportunity to make my last point before we get to Q&A, which is we talk about how the top 5% of apps make 200 times more. That's okay if you're a solo developer or if you have a small team. You don't have to be in the top 5% as long as you stay scrappy and keep your options open. But where you get into a lot of trouble is it's like the Game of Thrones line. You play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, right? You know what you're signing up for when you start to hire a large team and take venture capital, because then your options go down significantly. There's no middle ground.
Especially in consumer. I think it's a really, honestly, really risky play at this state of the economy now, the app economy now, taking venture for most B2C companies, but still should do it. Gotta have dreamers out there taking gambles, keep the wheels spinning. So
yeah. All right, let's jump to a few questions. Jacob or Phil, we're at the top of the hour, so if either of you need to bounce, just wave and move on with your day. But I'm happy to stay for another 10 or 15 minutes and try and answer a few of these top questions. But I'll start with I'm going to cherry pick a few. Again, the ones more focused on kind of things we're more equipped to answer versus kind of specific data related questions. So I'm going to start with this one from Hannah. Jacob talked about the importance of onboarding since most trial conversions happen within the first 24 hours. Do you have any recommendations of apps that you've noticed do this incredibly well? So we've talked about a few, but Phil, I'm especially interested since you work with so many apps and kind of study this as much as you do. What are some of the other standout apps as far as, really maximizing that intent and onboarding?
Yeah, I'll give a few examples, and I talk about a number of these in my course. So one is there's a sleep app called Rise that's been around for a number of years now, but they follow many of the best practices we've talked about: front-loading positive psych, show, don't tell, get to the aha moment as fast as possible. And specifically how they do that is you land in their product. The very first screen is like, imagine there was a superpower that gave you all of these benefits. Well, it turns out there is. It's called sleeping well, but most of us don't sleep as well as we could be. The one metric that matters is sleep debt. And then we're going to help you figure out what your sleep debt is and optimize it. Like in 3 screens, they kind of tell you everything you need to know. And then through the magic of integrating with your Apple Watch or your other wearable device, they can give you this readout of like what your stats look like, how you compare to others, and specific tactics for how to improve. So that one is really, really good. Another one that I love is Duolingo. I know Duolingo is like the poster child for everything in our industry, but
they're the winners. They're the biggest, I think.
And
yeah.
It's similar, right? Like in your first 10 minutes on Duolingo, you come in, you tell them a few bits of information. What language are you studying? What is your current proficiency level, and what are your goals, and how much time are you willing to put in every day? And then they basically give you your first study session where they take you through a lesson for your language of choice, and you get to experience the Duolingo difference, which is like, I'm going to learn a language faster and do it in a way that's a lot more fun. So that's a really good one. Another thing that I think they do that's really clever, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to be at the end of the onboarding flow, they would show you their first ad. And then they would say ads help to make Duolingo free for users who order don't want to pay. But hey, do you not want to see ads anymore? Try out our free trial. And
it's a double side, right? They're habitualizing people who won't pay and like kind of lowering probably the sting of seeing ads, but then also like they're probably getting a decent little push into people who just, would rather pay. That's really, really smart. I haven't used Duolingo since they've added ads, so that's interesting.
Yeah, that was clever. And then I mentioned Ladder before, but Ladder is this fitness app that's been on a tear over the last couple of years. And one of the things that they've gotten really sophisticated about, and it's on the Sub Club podcast, is they have this onboarding quiz, and they've gotten to the point where they can literally predict a user's LTV based off of their responses to every quiz question, which allows them to both optimize their ad spend, but then also be really sophisticated about personalizing the core product experience once they get past onboarding. And so I think they're really best in class when it comes to some of the more like scientific aspects of the onboarding experience.
Yeah. I'll just shout out, check out Elevate. I don't know how it's the one I worked on. I think I'm sure it's changed quite a bit in the years I haven't been there, but and also their Elevate's makes another app called Balance Meditation. You should check out too. But like, onboarding was a game engines company, so we built the onboardings via the game engine, and we're able to do quite a bit of interesting stuff. So shout out to those. Plug my own work.
All right, those are great answers. This is a good question. I think we probably didn't cover it in depth enough in the report as far as how we actually calculate this. So Jacob, I'm going to put you on the spot and explain to us realized LTV for 14 days and 60 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's not super complex, and I might be off in the exact methodology we used. There might have been preparations for the report to get it ready, but it's realized. So there's, Phil mentioned PLTV, predictive LTV, which is like a hypothetical based on what we know now. Where do we think and there's error bars to that, how much lifetime value, how much revenue will be generated by this customer in the future. realized LTV is an empirical measure. So we look at a user at their 14-day mark from install and be how much money have they generated, period. It doesn't take into account active or inactive, trial or no trial or whatever. This is just like what we see. And so obviously like that can really be wonky for your app. So like if you have a 30-day trial or like you have, whatever. But it's just a very simple way. And like we've integrated some realized LTV measures in RevenueCat to give you kind of like a per user understanding, but that's it. Just how much money. It's a very fancy word for how much somebody spent in 60 days. So.
Yeah, I really like this stat because it's like you can, like Phil was saying earlier, you can get yourself twisted in knots trying to predict, years out into the future. But it's a very kind of direct and humbling and important figure to look at, like how much are we actually making?
Yeah, you can take it to the bank, right? Like look at your 60-day LTV for the last 2 months. And you can go to the bank and be like, hey, can I have an advance on this potentially, right? And you feel pretty good about that. What Phil is saying is like, if you get too far out over your skis and you're like, oh, well, I think my 1 year LTV is 5 times this. And then you go like write some checks your company literally can't cash. You're going to end up in trouble. So that's a nice thing about keeping it simple. It's just like, just look at ins and outs and, decide your comfort and risk level as far as how leveraged you get.
To the point around taking to the bank, I mean, this literally is the first question that most VCs will ask you if you do choose to go raise venture funding. And I was a VC for 3 years, right? Like I don't mean to, for the right business that's working, venture capital is great because it allows you to grow faster, put more fuel on the fire. One of the first questions they'll ask you is, what do your unit economics look like? And that comes down to lifetime value versus customer acquisition cost, LTV versus CAC. There's literally a ratio, the LTV over CAC ratio that they'll ask you about. They'll ask you, what's your CAC payback period? So how quickly are you paying back your spend on paid marketing channels to acquire subscribers? And so realized LTV is really valuable because, as Jacob said, it's real. You're not just predicting it anymore. And we've gone through so much volatility with COVID and everything else for the last few years that predicted LTV is highly volatile, but realized LTV is something you can really bank on.
Yeah, that's great.
There was a question here just to address the question in the chat around, is it just paid users or free? I think you can calculate it either way, but the important thing is to be apples to apples. So the worst thing you can do is take your LTV of all users, but only look at the acquisition cost subscribers or vice versa, right? Yeah. So typically I look at it both ways. Like, what's the cost of acquiring a subscriber versus the lifetime value of a subscriber? And what is the cost of acquiring a download versus the average LTV of a download? But the average LTV of a download is going to be much, much lower because only 2% on average of downloads convert to subscriptions.
I'm almost 100% certain that number we're looking at is the per download, because like if you think about it, most apps are cost more than $1, right? So if it were only subscribers, that number would be higher, right? So it's divided. You think about it, it's about a 1%, 2% conversion rate, and then like maybe $10. So that's probably more or less like how you end up at that number.
And one thing I can say definitively too is that RevenueCat does not ingest ad revenue. So this realized LTV is not actually taking into account those free users who are seeing ads or any other kind of form of monetization in the app, other than in-app purchases of consumable purchases, lifetime purchases, one-off purchases,
just anything
subscription, any money they directly pay you is what that number is taking into account. But it is a good question that when doing these equations, if you do have a significant free user base and you're showing ads to those user base, you want to have that realized LTV that would be included in that. But
it would be nice.
Phil's point, you could do it both ways.
Did that, wouldn't it, guys? That would be nice. Maybe we should talk to them.
Feature request.
That's something that could happen in the future.
All right, and then speaking of which, this is a kind of a hotly debated thing, but I think a fun thing to talk about in relation to everything we're discussing, from that early monetization, the long-term retention. So the question is, with regards to tiers, where do lifetime subscriptions come in? How do you think about pricing lifetime tiers, especially for newer, smaller apps? Phil, I'll let you take that one first.
I mean, my biggest advice here is make sure you don't price it too low if you're going to offer lifetime subscriptions at all. Because I think it's very tempting, right? Like annual subscriptions are better than monthly subscriptions when it comes to cash flow. Monthly subscriptions are better than weekly subscriptions. Well, lifetime subscriptions, that's great. I get like 4 years worth of cash right up front. The problem is we talked earlier about how you're building the foundation of your business on long-term, usually annual subscribers who have high enough intent that they're going to come back year after year and pay you. So if you give them a lifetime plan, well, you don't get to go back to that well. You've kind of like tapped it out, right? And so just be very, very careful. It's like the definition of a Faustian bargain where, you know, you're getting all this cash up front, but then you never get to monetize those users again. And almost by definition, anybody who's going to pay for a lifetime plan is going to be among your very best, highest intent users. So I have seen some apps use this well. It is a tool in your strategic toolkit, but be very, very careful. And I wouldn't do it until you are a relatively large and mature business that really understands your unit economics, because otherwise you're almost certainly going to price your lifetime plan too low, and you'll leave a lot of money on the table.
Yeah, it used to be a super important packaging move, like package it really high just to pull people up to like annual. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that the only advice is make sure it's expensive, embarrassingly expensive, right? Yeah, I mean, you could probably do some basic calculation, like, estimate what churn on annual would be, and then figure out the time cost of money, right? Like, what's it worth to you to have that money now versus having it in 3 or 4 years? But I've seen it feels like a lot of people have pulled lifetime. It's probably for the reasons you say, Phil. It's like, it's actually better to build these like for long-term recurring. And maybe there's an argument to be, I get counter to Phil's suggestion. Like maybe if you need the cash flow, like maybe get that built in so you can like build a little bit of cash flow. And then at some point when you've got some momentum, maybe you don't need it anymore because you can just funnel everybody to annual. I don't know. It's pricing and packaging is all best done with experimentation. So always run a test, I would say.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, for businesses with very favorable unit economics, it can be that powerful tool. I mean, you know, we see developers all the time using lifetime and doing things like Black Friday is the only time they offer lifetime, or, you know, or discounting I did a sale recently where I did a discounted lifetime sale. But like for me, I have a weather app and our unit economics are not as great as like, you know, if you have zero server costs, if you have zero data costs, if you have very low kind of costs to serve those users, you can be more flexible. And then it's just more about like how much consumer surplus are you leaving on the table by letting them pay up front. Like I wish I would have done the Headspace lifetime when it was $150 like 6 years ago, because I've paid them more than $150 over that time. But that's the thing, right? It's like, I wish I would have gone back in time and done that because it would have been a better deal for me. And so are you giving people a better deal versus being able to capture that revenue over time? And that's an equation. You just need to have enough certainty around that. And then I do think a lot of the folks I've seen using lifetime do just price it too low. I was shocked when I launched this update to Weather Up. I intentionally changed the lifetime that we previously had in the app to $160, 4 times the annual cost, because I knew the SKU would still show up in the App Store, even though we didn't show it in the app. And I was surprised to have 5 different customer support requests. How do I pay you $160? I was like,
well, yeah, I mean, there's capturing those. There are just some people who will like morally will not do a subscription. So like, there's lots of reasons to throw it in. I don't know. Again, my answer would be test it.
Yeah.
RevenueCats.com.
But if you are going to use a lifetime, it should really probably be something like 4 times your annual or something like that, and use it more as a tool to make your annual look like a good deal than making it such a good deal that everybody's jumping on lifetime. Again, unless that cash flow is really going to help you and you know your unit economics are very favorable and you can serve them for a decade and it not be a huge skin off your back.
I'm never that committed of a person that I'd buy a lifetime. Are you kidding me? Like
a
year is a lifetime in app land. What do we think?
If Spotify offered a lifetime deal, you'd jump on that, right? It's like
there's certain financial advisor first, probably, and make sure this is a good move. It feels like buying a timeshare. You know what I mean? Like I kind of like the optionality.
Yeah. All right, that was a fun one to cover. Let's see. there's a few more that I thought were, let's cover this one. Any predictions for subscription apps in 2024? Another question from Hannah. This is a good
money.
broad one.
Gonna keep making more money. I have no idea. If I could predict the consumer subscription market, I would just, I'd be a venture capitalist.
No, but that's a good prediction though. It's like, I think that's a valid prediction. Like what we've seen from 2022 to 2023 and now coming into 2024 is things are good. Like
just
people
keeps
are
growing.
willing to spend money.
Just keeps growing. It's maybe not, I think maybe in May of 2020, we thought we were headed to a different world, maybe like where it was going to go asymptotic, but kind of everybody thought that. But I would say I think we're still ahead probably if we hadn't had COVID and all that acceleration, and the fundamentals are good. Like apps are still getting good and getting better. Obviously there's all this like scuttlebutt in the news about, the Europe market and all this stuff, but it's a minority market. I don't think it's going to like vastly affect anything in 2024, maybe in the future. But yeah, I'm still like holding my breath for some big disruptive event on the hardware side and consumer. So like, is the iPhone reaching the end of its tenure as like the primary iPhone and Android, like the mobile phone, smartphone as like the primary computing device? But then again, it's probably 5 years for that even as well. So like, yeah, it's going to be just a boring year. Just make software people like, and it's going to sell. That's kind of my prediction.
Phil?
Yeah, I mean, the one that I shared in the report you guys recently put out, where you asked a number of people in the field around their predictions, was around AI, which felt like a little bit of a cop-out, but at the same time, it's like, that is going to be the single most important thing, I think, across all of it.
It already was. I mean, 23, like tons of, we should have broken this out maybe, but like tons of our breakout apps in 2023 were AI related. Like there's the big ones, but then also like, it's just every little like AI niche and whatever. And growth within the existing app base is like new features are getting built and all this stuff. And probably we haven't peaked on that yet. I think you're right.
Oh, I certainly think we haven't peaked. And to unpack that a little bit, I think one thing that's exciting is there are going to be entirely new business models and categories that emerge with AI being as disruptive as it is. And so like the consumer subscription app ecosystem has been maturing for years now. And there are very few niches that are like huge niches that haven't already been tapped with multiple category leaders. But I think AI is going to open up new opportunities for the first time in a little while. So that's really exciting. But on the more cautionary side, I think there are going to be a number of categories. I think education is one that I specifically spoke to because I spent so long at Quizlet, where I think the upside is going to be as big or bigger than it was before, but the way to win is going to completely change. And companies that don't adapt are just going to go out of business very quickly. So to speak more to education, companies like Chegg have built multi-billion-dollar public businesses over the last decade, largely based on content. That's how they've differentiated themselves, right? They have the most content, they have the best content. Well, AI renders content.
Sam just trained his whole model on their content. So
yeah,
well, I would like to have that content, please.
Yeah, exactly. So the content is going to become more and more commoditized as a consumer. Now, as a B2B's business, they're sitting on a lot of valuable data. So to your point, maybe that's a way that they can monetize the content as training data for an AI model. But as a consumer, it's like, why would I pay a company like, I don't want to take on Chegg, but why would I pay these companies, $15 a month or $100 a year for a subscription when there are so many cheaper or free alternatives now? But the new way to win is going to be personalizing the study experience to every individual student based off of their level, the subjects they're studying, which university they're at, their academic goals. And it just changes the rules of the game. Like there's still going to be big
easier too. Like,
yeah.
Do that kind of, you could do that stuff with like rules engines and whatever, but it's just so many fewer people can do that now. Like I've seen a couple, he had a friend, he was like, when the ChatGPT stuff was really trying to blow up, he's like, I'm going to do a tour guide app. Like I'm going to do a walking tours app, one person, right? Like in the past, I would have taken a huge content team to like generate content, like audio, whatever. He's like, yeah, I can just script against ChatGPT and I can generate it. It's not going to be National Geographic level content, but like, hey, for one person, like you can probably build a pretty decent little app that way. And like, that's in some ways, like if you want to talk about like it just feeding into what we're already doing, like you're saying, Phil, it's just computers can do more now. Like they couldn't do this, what they can do 2 years ago. And that's just going to create more create more opportunity and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, maybe that's my last prediction, which maybe is a little bit more nuanced than AI is important, which is like, I think you're going to start to see more and more of a bimodal distribution, where at the top end, you're going to have a lot of consolidation into big categories like education and fitness. Like you're going to have 2 or 3 category leaders that start to gobble up all these smaller companies that in many cases raised too much money before the pandemic. And they're sort of like zombie companies now because they don't have profitable business models, but they're sitting on all this cash. They've got interesting IP. And so at some point they'll just get acquired. But then on the other end of the market, the other part of the bimodal distribution is going to be all of these small upstarts that come along with much smaller teams, to your point, Jacob, because now I don't need a 50-person team. I can do this myself or with a 5-person team. And I think you're going to see a lot of these smaller companies that their goal isn't to become a $1 billion public company. But with 5 people, if you build $100 million business, that's a really good outcome.
That's efficiency. That's the like entire march of techno capitalism, right? Like doing more with less and ideally creating software that people want and monetizing it. So yeah, I think for everybody, you know, the 64 people who stuck with us this far, like I think it's a really exciting time if you're in a small or like starting something new. I think it's just as good as it was, even if it's more crowded and whatever. I think there's just as much opportunity in 2024 as there was in 2014. So.
Yeah, well, I think that's a fantastic place to wrap it up. There is just so much opportunity. AI changes things, but also creates so much opportunity. And as Jacob put it, the subscription apps are just growing. People are more willing than ever to pay for things they find valuable. And then we're all kind of riding this kind of rising tide that's floating all boats of people paying for something like ChatGPT, $20 a month. And it's like, oh, well, you know, that's bringing me a ton of value. Well, then this, you know, fitness app is bringing me value. I'll pay for that. And then, oh, that's, you know, Spotify. And I think we're just continuing to see the consumer sentiment around subscriptions, even though there's like subscription fatigue and people bitching and moaning about that.
It's a myth.
It's because so much more value is being created through software. And then, and people will complain about paying for anything.
Yeah.
But what we see in the numbers and what the State of Subscription Apps report shows, what we see internally at RevenueCat is that while there is this kind of, while it's fun for journalists to talk about subscription fatigue, like that's just not what shows up in the numbers. It's that, okay, people don't want to pay for things like that. That's life.
9 at 11.
But people do pay for things they find valuable. So go build something valuable and people will pay for it. And I think that's just more true than ever we're shifting views.
Oh, that's
around.
me. If everybody sees that. Oh, sorry.
But anyways, I think it's a great place to wrap it up. So Jacob and Phil, thank you so much for your time. And the whole team at RevenueCat put a ton of work into the State of Subscription Apps report. So go through that, and it's like 160 pages. So it's maybe a week or month long project to really digest all the stuff that we shared in that. But it's worth the time for all the reasons that we shared here. And then to wrap up, if you liked some of the discussion here, you'll probably enjoy the Sub Club podcast if you haven't already heard about it. Jacob and I talk to folks like Phil on a regular basis, leaders in the subscription app industry, interesting folks doing interesting things, and talk to them about what they're finding success in, their failures, and other things. So check out the podcast. And we also have a community where we chat about all these things, and a bi-weekly newsletter where we share news from around the industry and best practices and tips and all that sort of thing. And then check out Phil's stuff. So, he mentioned at the head of the webinar, his Reforge course. I actually was in his first cohort, and it was phenomenal. The speakers, the content, we had Phil on the podcast to talk about his framework. What do you call it again? The framework
subscription
for
value. I'm actually, I've talked to Peter about writing a guest post with you all on it. So I'll do that in the next month.
Nice. But so Phil kind of gave an overview of the subscription value loop on the podcast. And while I really enjoyed that, sitting through and reading all the content that he kind of expanded upon to create the course, it was really just fantastic. So if you're in this industry and looking to kind of up your game and really go deep on all these subjects and hear from people from Tinder and Duolingo and Strava and other top apps, I can't recommend that course enough. Anything else you wanted to say about that or your work, Phil?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed the course so much. And the next cohort is going to be running in May. So it's coming up in the next couple months. The pilot was this January. It was the first time I'd ever run it. It ended up being one of the highest rated courses in Reforge's winter cohort. So I'm excited to run it again. I've got a great lineup of guest speakers for the May course. It's going to be Ravi Mehta from Tinder, Gina from Duolingo. I mentioned those two before. And then a couple new speakers, Yuri Temin from Grammarly and
cool.
Sam Sabetti from All Trails. So it'll be a great lineup, and check out the course on Reforge if you're interested. And then for folks who want a little bit more of my time, I do have this advising business that is my full-time job. And so I've been at max capacity for the last few months, but I do have 1 or 2 spots that'll likely open up here in the next month or two. So I typically say companies that already have product market fit and are looking for how to maximize their growth rate and reach scale, that's really my sweet spot. And so if that's you, check out my website. Feel free to reach out to me at Phil G. Carter on LinkedIn or X, and be happy to talk more.
Awesome. And thank you everybody for joining us, and talk to you again soon.